Do you believe in ghosts? In invisible presences? Today we will delve into the darker side of reality, where the inexplicable and the paranormal intertwine. On Reddit, thousands of people share their paranormal experiences, stories that will leave you breathless. Get ready to hear 8 terrifying stories that will make you question everything you think you know. 1. I used to live in my mother-in-law's house. We had all had several sensations or strange experiences in the house, but 2 really stand out. In total, there were 3 dogs living in the house at the time. One night, we are all sitting with our backs to the hallway, this is significant, watching a movie. Suddenly, my German Shepherd and my Terrier raise their ears and start staring down the hallway behind where we are sitting. I mean, with all their attention. I notice and turn around, the hallway light was off, it was dark, but of course I see nothing. 5 minutes later, they are still staring and now growling. This time, my wife and I turn around and see the light switch on the wall flip on. The dogs went crazy and so did we. A few weeks later. Same scenario, the light is off and we are watching a movie. My German Shepherd loved to play fetch and we always had a million balls to keep her entertained. This time, she is staring down the hallway and wagging her tail. This time, we all notice and start watching. I swear a ball, a single orange tennis ball, rolled down the hallway to her. We all turned white. There were a few others, but God, I hated that hallway. It never felt like a bad energy, but my little brain was still freaked out anyway. Edit, one more story. My mother-in-law was having these dreams a few weeks after moving in about the house catching fire and burning to the ground with us inside. Horrible. About 3 weeks after these dreams, we woke up one morning and could clearly smell smoke coming from somewhere in the house. Terrified, we all started searching and finally made it to the garage. On a beam, we noticed smoke coming from around a fluorescent light fixture. At that moment it dawned on me. Oh my God, it's connected directly to this old dry beam. The light was left on all night and was clearly charring the beam slightly. Light should not be secured/screwed into a beam like that. So we like to think our host ghosts were looking out for all of us. After that, her dreams stopped. 2. I once worked as a home inspector. A new client had purchased a home and I was tasked with inspecting it. According to the information available, the house was very old, built in 1908, and quite dilapidated. To be honest, I was not in a hurry to inspect the house, so I scheduled it for my last stop of the day. I did my job as usual and then headed to the house. I parked my car on the road and as I walked up the path, nothing extraordinary caught my attention. It was a rundown 3-story house. To me, it was just a common ruin. I guess the buyers had walked through it and saw some potential in the house, but I didn't see any. It was starting to get dark and since I didn't have the key to the front door, I walked around the property to access the back door. Upon reaching the back of the house, I noticed that the back door led to a large kitchen. What caught my attention at that moment was that as the sun began to set behind me, I felt a drastic change in the air temperature. It was late summer and I assumed that was the reason for the drop in temperature. I turned to watch the sunset, noticing that the cloud cover gave the sky a beautiful crimson hue. I turned towards the door and that's when I saw it. On the other side of the kitchen there was a door that led to a hallway that in turn led to the front door. The front door had stained glass. But what was standing in the darkness of the hallway, to this day, still makes my hair stand on end. There was a silhouette of a man. Judging by his build, I could tell it was a man. No features could be distinguished, just a black silhouette. What happened next froze me on the spot. Where his face was, 2 eyes opened. And they were red. Without blinking and without moving, those eyes glowed red and I could tell they were staring directly at me. At first I couldn't look away. Those red orbs seemed to stare directly into my soul, and I found myself mesmerized staring at them. Every fiber of my being told me that I should run, but I couldn't move. I stared at the red eyes, and they, in turn, stared at me without blinking. My eyes began to water and I blinked to clear them, but when I opened my eyes again, the silhouette was gone. I was terrified. I ran quickly around the house, jumped into my car and sped home. What normally takes me 25 minutes by car, only took me 10, as I couldn't escape fast enough. In my report I wrote that the house had some structural problems that could not be fixed, and the house was eventually demolished. In its place there is now a housing unit with 6 3-bedroom houses. I have heard stories from workers who have been on the site at night, and they have all said that they have felt a chill every time they go there. I researched the history of the property, but found nothing unusual. Until that moment in my life, I had never believed in the supernatural or the paranormal. Even now I am skeptical of most things. But I know that what I saw was pure evil, and I have never had an encounter like that since. Sometimes it was used to house up to 4 patients, but even when there was only one, they would complain in the morning that they hadn't slept well because their neighbor was making noise. The chilling thing is that the nurses confirmed that the room was empty. The same person who tells the story mentions that in the hospital grounds there was a playground where some had seen a little girl playing at night. And to finish with this hospital, there is talk of a specific room in the ICU that nurses avoided at all costs. A room where patients became inexplicably unstable if left alone. What kind of negative energy was concentrated in that room, and why? We leave the hospital and delve into 2 short but impactful stories. The first takes us to an apartment with several roommates who share a series of disturbing experiences. They see the same woman in the apartment, experience power outages, and a general feeling of unease. The shared experience gives greater credibility to the story. One of the roommates describes the woman as if she were dead. A detail that chills our blood and reminds us that sometimes what we see with our own eyes can be more frightening than any story we can be told. To finish this first part of our journey into the paranormal, we move to a campsite where 2 friends have an experience that leaves them with the feeling of being watched. Imagine 2 friends camping in a remote location where they are the only visitors. They begin to feel a strange sense of unease, accompanied by an unusual silence that oppresses them. Suddenly they hear the sound of an engine approaching. It is an ATV, a vehicle that should not be there. The ATV circles the campsite, illuminating them with its lights for a second before disappearing. Their relief is short-lived, as shortly after they hear the sound of several ATVs approaching. The ATVs stop at the entrance to the campsite, illuminating them with their lights again before disappearing into the darkness. Terrified, the friends decide to spend the night awake, taking turns watching. The following morning they leave the campsite without looking back. 2 stories that, despite their brevity, leave us with a sense of unease and remind us that the paranormal can manifest anywhere and in many different ways. We resume our journey through the inexplicable, exploring stories that make us question the limits of reality. Do you remember the story of the mother-in-law's house and the dogs that seemed to perceive something invisible? Yes, and how the mother-in-law then had those premonitory dreams about the fire. A story that made us think about the possibility of protective spirits. Precisely, our next story also points in that direction. A person recounts how after the death of her grandmother she began to notice her presence in the house. Not terrifying apparitions, but small signs that suggested that her grandmother was still there somehow. Signs such as the scent of her grandmother's perfume even though the bottle was put away. Or finding objects that belonged to her in places where they should not be. And the curious thing is that these signs always seem to occur at times of difficulty or sadness, as if the grandmother was trying to comfort her from beyond the grave. It is moving to think that our loved ones could remain close, watching over us even after death. But as we will see in the next story, not all encounters with the inexplicable are so comforting. We enter an old mental sanatorium, a place laden with stories, pain and, according to many, negative residual energy. A group of friends, whether out of curiosity or recklessness, decide to explore the abandoned sanatorium. A classic scenario of horror stories that never fails to give us goosebumps. Armed with flashlights and cameras, the friends enter the sanatorium, unaware of the danger that lurks within those decrepit walls. At first everything seems calm, but as they go deeper, the atmosphere becomes more apprehensive. The temperature drops and the smell of damp and medicine churns their stomachs as if the suffering of the past permeated the environment. They reach a room with the beds and nightstands intact as if the patients had suddenly disappeared. One of the friends takes a picture and when reviewing it, he gets a chilling surprise. In the photo appears a blurry figure next to one of the beds, a figure that was not there when they took the photo, a ghost of the past that refuses to be forgotten. Terrified, the friends leave the sanatorium convinced that they were not alone. From an abandoned sanatorium we move to the world of dreams where the line between reality and fantasy becomes even more blurred. Dreams have always been a mystery. In this story, a person recounts a series of recurring dreams that deeply disturb her. They are not simple nightmares, but seem to convey a message or a warning. In the dreams she finds herself in a dark and unknown place pursued by an invisible presence that stalks her and watches her and fills her with terror. The person describes the feeling of being trapped without being able to escape while the evil presence approaches. Upon awakening, the anguish persists. The most curious thing is that she begins to notice coincidences in her real life that seem to be related to the dreams. For example, she begins to see the number 7 everywhere. A number that according to some beliefs is associated with bad luck or the paranormal. And as if this were not enough, she begins to feel watched even during the day, as if the presence of her dreams were following her in the real world. Are the dreams just a product of her imagination or is there something more? We change perspective with the following story. It is about the experience of a medium who helps people connect with their deceased loved ones. The figure of the medium is viewed with respect and veneration in some cultures, while in others it is considered with skepticism. In this story, the medium recounts how she discovered her gift at an early age and how she has used it to help people find peace and comfort. She describes how during the session she feels the presence of the spirits around her and receives messages that she then transmits to the relatives or friends of the deceased. Messages that are often comforting, full of love and shared memories. The medium also talks about the difficulties of her work, the emotional burden of connecting with the pain of others and the misunderstanding of those who do not believe in her abilities. But not all spirits are benevolent. Our next story takes us to an old house where a family faces an evil presence that seems determined to terrorize them. A family moves into an old house full of charm and history, but also with a dark past they are unaware of. At first they notice strange things, objects moving from place, doors that open and close by themselves, whispers that seem to come from the walls. The lights begin to flicker, electronic devices turn on and off by themselves, and the temperature of the house fluctuates inexplicably. The children begin to have nightmares and to talk about a shadowy figure that watches them from the shadows. The situation becomes untenable when accidents begin to occur, objects falling from shelves, glass breaking for no reason, stumbling in inexplicable falls. It is as if an invisible force was trying to harm them, an evil force that seems to want to expel them from the house. Desperate, they contact an expert in the paranormal to help them understand what is happening. A decision that confronts them with the truth about the dark past of the house and the presence that inhabits it. They are forced to make a difficult decision, confront the spirit or leave the house forever. A story that leaves us with the unsettling feeling that there are places where darkness and the spirits of the past manifest in a terrifying way. And speaking of terrifying places, our next story takes us to a cemetery where a group of young people experience something that will change their lives. Cemeteries have always been surrounded by mystery and superstition. In this story, a group of friends decides to spend Halloween night in a cemetery looking for thrills and defying local legends. Armed with flashlights and alcohol, they enter the cemetery intending to spend a night of laughter and jokes, ignoring the warnings of the locals about the spirits that roam there during Halloween night. At first everything seems calm, but as the night progresses, the atmosphere becomes more tense. They begin to feel a presence around them, the sensation of being watched as if the spirits of the deceased had awakened. One of the friends decides to make a joke and hides behind a tombstone. When he comes out of his hiding place, he comes face to face with a spectral figure. A tall and skeletal figure dressed in ragged clothes with red eyes that glow in the dark. The friend screams in terror and runs away. The others, seeing the scene, also flee in terror. An experience that leaves them scarred, and that makes them rethink the idea of playing with the supernatural again. From a cemetery we enter a forest where a man encounters something that defies all logic and explanation. A man who enjoys long walks in the forest decides to explore an area he has never visited before, attracted by the natural beauty of the place and the tranquility. As he enters, the environment becomes dense and silent, as if nature was warning him of something. Suddenly he hears a strange sound, a deep hum that seems to come from the heart of the forest. Intrigued, he decides to follow the sound to its source without knowing that he is entering a forbidden territory where reality is distorted. He arrives at a clearing where the hum intensifies and sees something that leaves him breathless. A metallic object of cylindrical shape that seems to levitate a few meters from the ground. An object that does not seem from this world. The man approaches cautiously, trying to understand what he sees. Suddenly the object opens and a blinding light floods the clearing. A light that seems to come from another dimension. He tries to protect his eyes, but it is too late. The light envelopes him completely, transporting him to an unknown place. The man disappears without leaving a trace to an unsolved mystery. A story that reminds us that there are forces in this world that we cannot understand, and places where reality folds in on itself. And speaking of challenges to reason, our next story takes us to an abandoned house where a group of paranormal investigators faces an entity that seems to want to communicate with them. The investigators tour the house room by room, looking for any sign of the paranormal, using their equipment to detect changes in temperature, electromagnetic fluctuations, or any indication of unusual activity. At first there are no significant results, but the patience of the investigators is rewarded. In a room, a camera captures a fleeting movement, a shadow that crosses the image at great speed, a shadow that has no logical explanation. The investigators review the recording over and over again, trying to identify the shadow, convinced that they have captured evidence of paranormal activity. Meanwhile, in another room, one of the investigators feels a cold and threatening presence at his side. He tries to communicate with the presence using a Ouija board. The Ouija board begins to move, showing a cryptic message, a message that leaves no doubt about the intentions of the entity. Scared, the investigators leave the house, convinced that they have awakened something that is better left asleep. Paranormal investigation can be dangerous, and there are forces that are better not to invoke. To conclude our immersion in paranormal stories, we will explore two stories that show us how the inexplicable can manifest in unexpected ways. Let's start with a story that takes us to the realm of the everyday, but with a disturbing twist. After the loss of a loved one, a person begins to receive phone calls that defy all logic. It is curious how technology that in theory should bring us closer sometimes seems to open a portal to the unknown. The person recounts how, after the death of her mother, she begins to receive calls to the landline phone in her house. When answering, there is only silence, no voice on the other side. At first it might be thought of as prank calls or missed dials, but the calls persisted, always at the same time with an increasing frequency. The chilling thing is that on some occasions she swears she heard her mother's voice on the other side of the line, a weak, almost imperceptible voice whispering her name. Terrified, she changes the phone number, but the calls continue, a technological failure or an attempt of communication from beyond the grave. This story leaves us with the doubt of whether the line that separates the world of the living from the dead is as solid as we believe. And to finish, we enter an old town where legends and secrets of the past are intertwined with the present. Sometimes what seems like a simple local story can hide a much deeper and sinister truth. A group of students during a graduation trip decides to visit an old abandoned town, attracted by the stories they have heard and the promise of an adventure. Upon arrival, they find themselves in a phantasmagoric setting, houses in ruins, deserted streets, and an unsettling silence that envelopes everything, a silence that seems to hold the secrets of a tragic past. Excited by the atmosphere, the students explore the abandoned houses, take photos, and record videos, ignoring the warnings of the locals who advised them not to approach the town, especially at night. As the sun sets, the atmosphere becomes more oppressive. They begin to feel a presence around them, an invisible but palpable presence in every step or every breath. They hear strange noises of footsteps in the empty houses, whispers that seem to come from the wind, laments that chill the blood, signs that they are not alone in that ghost town. In one of the houses, one of the students finds an old diary that tells the story of the town and the tragedy that devastated it decades ago. The diary tells how an epidemic ended the lives of most of its inhabitants. The few who survived abandoned the town, taking with them the memory of the tragedy. But the diary also speaks of an ancient curse that weighs on the town, a curse that condemns the souls of the dead to wander eternally through its streets. Terrified by what they have discovered, the students decide to leave the town, but the curse will not let them escape so easily. As they flee, they are pursued by the shadows of the dead, shadows that try to trap them, drag them to the world of spirits. Only a few manage to escape alive, marked forever by the experience. A story that reminds us that there are places where the past refuses to die and where the secrets they keep can have terrible consequences. And so we conclude our journey through paranormal stories. Stories that have taken us from haunted houses to ghost towns, from protective spirits to evil entities. What makes these stories so fascinating is that in the end, everyone must decide what to believe. Simple coincidences? Games of the mind? Or is there something beyond what we can explain? The only certain thing is that the world is full of mysteries. And the line that separates the real from the supernatural is thinner than we think. Thank you for joining us in this investment in the unknown. I hope you enjoyed this video. If so, it would help me a lot if you subscribed to the channel and gave it a like. And don't forget to leave a comment. I love reading your opinions and suggestions to continue creating content that you like. And remember, if you ever hear a strange noise at night or feel a presence at your side, or maybe you are